So, how often do you pick up your phone, see somebody's message, drop everything you're doing so that you can answer them first? You might be very busy, you might be focused at something you're doing, but you are really responding to a chat message just because you feel guilty. They have seen that I've seen their message. They must be waiting for me. It doesn't matter how important the message is, but you feel so obligated that you have to respond. Otherwise, you'll come across as rude. How often do you drop everything? No matter what you're doing, drop everything for your friends, for your family, for your clients, for your team, for your neighbors, so that you can be helpful. How often do you struggle saying no because somebody else needs you, even though you really might not be in a state of being mentally, physically, financially, or in any other way that you can actually afford to help people? How often do you sacrifice your own joy so that somebody else can be happy? And more importantly, how often do you actually want to keep others happy, want to make sure that nobody's upset with you? In other terms, people pleasing, because of the kind of experiences you've had, because you've been told that you don't care, because you've been told that you're selfish, whether you are or not, but that's what you've been told. Because of that, you are always trying to please others. You're always trying to take care of somebody else. And most importantly, how often do you work long hours, weekends, on your birthdays, anniversaries, so that you can stay on top of business needs, be noticed, be seen at work, and not be seen as complacent or not competent enough? Pretty often, I would say. But when do you find the time for yourself? Do you realize that you're being unkind to yourself? You're trying to be kind to everybody else. You're trying to support everybody else. You're trying to take care of everybody else but yourself. And why do we do that? Because being kind to yourself is not normal. It's selfish. It's self-centered. Not my words. That's how the world makes you feel. And that's what we want to change today. And that's why today's topic is normalizing self-kindness. And of course, with me is Terry McDougall. If you are a Dreamaniac audience, you already know Terry very well. She's no stranger. But for people who don't know who Terry is, let's bring her on and get the introduction done. Hey, Terry, how you going?
Good, Sebastian. How are you?
I am always good in your company, and you know that you bring my smiles back. And I have to say, before even we start, we rescheduled it so many times, and that was the act of self-kindness that we both decided it has to be done.
Totally.
So before we get into the topic itself, for people who are strangely new to Dreamaniac and you, can you please let them know who you are and what you
Yeah, hi, I'm Terry McDougall, and I am the owner and chief executive coach at Terry B. McDougall Coaching. I work with high achieving people to help them be more successful and happier at work. So often people who are successful are doing it at a cost to themselves. They're really not stopping to say, am I happy about this? And that's part of the reason why I'm here, because I really want to encourage people to put themselves higher on their priority list so that they can be kind. And, you know, it- success is just not on paper. Success is how you feel about your life. And so what is success unless you're enjoying the fruits of your labor?
absolutely. And you've also written a book around all this, which we'll come to later. But let me take a couple of comments from Joanna, because she is already saying guilty as charged. Once again, guilty as charged. Eek. Which is normally the case. And I think it's more specifically for people who are highly sensitive people. are empaths who feel for others. We feel obligated to protect everybody else and take care of everybody else but ourselves. So I do have to start really, what does true self kindness mean to you, Terry? Uh, and I'm not talking about self care, going to
Hmm. Hmm.
going to the gym, maybe going for a spa day. I'm not talking about all that superficial self care.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about, what does it mean to you beyond all that, fad?
Yeah, I think that self-kindness is about having compassion for yourself. It's about being tuned in and noticing how you're feeling and caring about that, recognizing that you are worthy of taking the time. I mean, you brought it up about how we've rescheduled this a few times and we've done it for good reason. We each had different things going on and it just wasn't an ideal time. And rather than us sticking to the schedule because that's what the calendar said. We said, is this the best thing for both of us? And the answer was no. And it wasn't a big deal to reschedule it. Um, but so often we can say to ourselves, like, oh no, I have these obligations to other people and I'm sick, but I'm going to get up and do this for others because they're depending on me. When we would not actually expect that from somebody else that was in the same situation. So we have to really value ourselves, love ourselves, respect ourselves, have compassion for ourselves. That to me, that's what self-kindness is.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned, get things done and everything. There's a little heroism kind of a display at workplace, that if you show up for
Hmm.
everything, if even if you're sick, even if you're
Hmm.
unwell, even if you're too busy, but you show up to
Hmm.
work, you're a
Yeah.
hero. It's somehow rewarded to not take care of yourself.
Well, I mean, to me, it's you're putting yourself in a position to be manipulated and used. And it can feel good sometimes to feel needed. But unless we have boundaries, we're going to be used up. And nobody, many people will use that. There are a lot of manipulators out there. You and I have talked about this a lot that,
Yeah,
um, that they know that people are sort of addicted to this feeling of being needed and being the hero and so forth. And they'll buy into that and try to manipulate you through your need for that external validation. But if you don't have boundaries, it might get to the point where there's just none of you left. And you've got to have those boundaries and say, you know what, I've given enough. Now it's time for me to turn my attention to myself, or I'm sick and I'm sorry that I'm going to not be there for you, but I have to be there for me. And that's okay. And when we let other people say, "Oh, well, you're selfish," or you just think too much about yourself, or you're not, a team player or whatever, we've got to really see that for what it is and reject it and go back to standing next to ourselves and saying, "I'm here for me." Because the
absolutely.
reality is there's a lot of people out there who are there for them and they're doing it unapologetically and they are trying to use other people to further their own goals. So just see
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is where, I have to ask, how does past trauma, past experiences, and
Sure.
all the even betrayal shape us
Yes.
into this negative self-talk that we have to be there for others. We have to,
Yeah.
uh, we have to sacrifice ourselves. We have to
Yeah.
only and only think of others. We have to please others. We have to,
Yeah.
my own needs mean nothing. How does
Sure.
trauma play a role in that?
Well, I mean, we've all been conditioned up to this point in our lives. I mean, through our childhood, we're conditioned. And a lot of that conditioning is good conditioning, right? Like we're being taught how to operate in society, right? But sometimes it's not good conditioning. It might be, you and I have talked about this. If you have people in your lives who are not, fully mentally healthy, they may try to use you in ways that are good for them, but they're not good for you. And if you've gotten used to that and you've got that wound, sometimes when you're out in the world, other people, other manipulative people can see that and they'll use that to try to use you. And that's why it's very important to, sort of zoom out and have the self-awareness and to get help so that you can heal from some of these traumatic wounds so that you don't keep getting traumatized, re-traumatized again and again, because it can lead people to feeling like, they're a loser and, nobody ever treats them well and so forth. And the reality might be that they're allowing it to happen because they've got this wound. Maybe they don't recognize it and they really do need to step back and protect themselves and learn how to heal from the injuries that they've had in the past. And there's not, I really want to say too that there's nothing wrong with you if something like that has happened. You've been victimized, but if you start to see that there's a pattern, step back and care for yourself, heal from it, and recognize that you deserve more. And just because somebody abused you or hurt you in the past doesn't mean that you need to continue doing that.
Absolutely. And as you were saying, just like Joanna, I was gently raising my hand. Yep, been there, done that, still do it.
Sure,
So I am
exactly.
guilty as charged.
Right.
I think the biggest thing that I notice about myself and my behavior is a lot of times, because of what has happened in the past, even though the people in my life right now are not trying to do that, the triggers tell me if I don't do this, they're going to be upset with me. If I don't do this, they're going to say something bad about
Yeah.
me. It becomes such a cycle
Mhm.
that sometimes, as you said, people are trying to use you. Sometimes they're not even trying. You just get used because you said a very
You
great thing.
volunteer. You volunteer to be
You
used.
volunteered
Yes.
and you don't know your boundaries, and you are the
Yeah,
first person breaking
sure.
your boundaries. In fact,
Mhm.
Joanna just says, I love that you were both confident enough to reschedule. It's pretty rare. So, Joe, honestly, this was the sixth reschedule. Sixth reschedule, and you were the
And
last guest. So you can imagine it's been 3 months, you know. Uh,
well, and I have to say, like, can I just interject here? I mean, you were always so funny too about like being so apologetic. And I'm like, whatever, we will have this when we have it. And when we have it, it's going to be a good show. Right. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to force it. Right. And we've had
Absolutely.
so many
And
good conversations in between that I think are making this a better show than it would have been had we had it a couple months ago.
absolutely. And we supported each other. We were there for each
Totally.
other. We pretty much coached each other into things that we needed to
Hmm.
kind of deal with.
Yeah,
And,
totally.
that was really, really awesome. And as you can see, our energy right now, I'm happy that we delayed. I'm not going to say we delayed. I'm happy that we are doing it at the right time, you know.
Yes, yes.
And Joe also says, I love that, Terry. Boundaries prevent us being used up. Joe,
Mhm.
Terry, both of you, my biggest problem is I'm the first person who breaks my boundary. So that's something I need to work on, and I
Well,
constantly am, really.
you know what? Here's the thing, you can always walk it back, right? Like, yes, we have boundaries, we allow some people to come closer, we keep others further back, and sometimes we make a judgment like, "Okay, I allowed somebody or I let that boundary down," and then when we discover that that was we don't feel comfortable with it, we can push the boundary back. It's fine, and we don't need to judge ourselves for maybe making a misjudgment or thinking that we had more energy or whatever to take care of something. At any point, we can say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't think I can do that. And that's
Yeah.
fine. Other people do it. We can do it too. It's fine. It's ourselves. We can protect ourselves. We can love ourselves. We can value and respect ourselves. We
I
should.
think one thing that sort of makes it difficult to, whether it's boundaries or whether it's kind of, putting yourself first, is the social construct, the things we've been through, the society.
Sure.
We feel guilty about, sharing how we feel. We feel
Hmm.
ashamed, we feel embarrassed, and all those things. So I do have to
Hmm.
ask you, how does the social construct and cultural conditioning come in the way of self-kindness in your experience?
Well, I mean, again, I think it goes back to that conditioning, what I was bringing up before. And, we have to recognize that sometimes that, the social construct and the conditioning is there, to serve society or to serve our parents or to serve the teachers or whatever. But we need to step up and take up a little bit more space at the table there and say, well, how's it serving me? And I think it's very helpful too, to in those moments when we feel obligated, to take a moment and say, well, how am I really feeling? What is driving this behavior? Is it fear? If it's fear, you need to think twice, right? Is it, is it joy? Is it excitement? Is it, love? Is that what's driving your behavior? Great, keep doing it. If it's fear that they're not going to like me anymore, or, and then dig a little deeper and ask yourself, well, does that matter? Right? Like, are they using this to try to, manipulate me for their own means? Right? Like, really get clear on what your motivator is for taking that action. I mean, honestly, you might still do it, but be clear about it. Be clear about it.
Absolutely love that. And I have something called CTCR. I'll get into that later. It's about how I filter that, whether it's fear or where do I stand. But before that, I want to take this comment from Dahlia. She says, and being kind to yourself is being gentle when you break your own boundaries. And I think that's so important, so very important message, because giving yourself grace, allowing yourself to, hey, you know what? I allowed that boundary to be broken, but I do recognize I need to put it back up again. Right. I was taking notes as you were talking.
Right.
I love two things you said. Number one is recognize what's the root of that. What's the feeling that you're dealing with? And for me, it's like, is it fear? Then think twice. I'm literally gonna put that there. If it's fear, think twice. Terry B. McDougall.
Oh my gosh.
Because I think that is true. It is fear, whether it's shame or embarrassment. That is a form of fear. We don't want to be ashamed. We don't want to be embarrassed. So we are afraid of something, because of which we allow people. And in fact, I will keep saying this, we ourselves break the boundary, because at the end of the day, even if somebody's trying to come across the boundary, if you don't say yes, they can't break it.
Right. I mean, that's called assault if they do. Sometimes they do, right? But that's assault. That's illegal. But a lot of times people are trying to, convince you to let your boundary down, right? And then we make that choice. And I want to also, and actually, before I go any further, I want to say, hi, Dahlia, love you. And Joe, thank you for tuning in. It's so beautiful to see lovely people that we know tuning into the show. But now I'm like distracted from what I was going to say.
When you're talking about the fear.
So often when we let a boundary down, we'll look back and we'll shame ourselves. We'll have a lot of regret. And listen, let it go, right? Let it go. Just notice it. And then make a decision, like say, okay, what was it that made me feel like I needed to let that boundary down, let that person manipulate me or me do something that I didn't want to do? What was the trigger there? Okay. And then decide in that moment, okay, the next time that happens, this is what I think I'm going to do instead. But love yourself and forgive yourself for doing that. And also understand that if you have been conditioned, either by being with somebody who was abusive or having parents that raised you in a certain way, they were doing that for a reason. They were doing that because they thought this was going to help you be successful in society, right? Maybe society has changed. Maybe you're living in a different place, or you just have different beliefs or whatever. But that came from a good place, but it may not be serving you. So just let it go, notice it. And when you see that happen in the future, do something different and forgive yourself. Like, even if you stumble and you do the wrong thing in that, or the thing you didn't want to do in that moment, you can always say, you know what? I know I said yes, and I'm sorry, because I'm actually going to say no now. You can do that. You are allowed to do that. You can change your mind. I think that's self-kindness, it really is.
Absolutely. However, I hate to say this, there are certain battles within that make it so difficult to be self-kind.
Sure.
And I do have to ask you, according to you, what are those inner battles where we know, you and I know boundaries, you and I know that it's not healthy, you and I know when something is wrong and we're feeling exhausted and tired,
Sure.
yet we allow it to happen. So what do you think is, for you, in your experience, what has been your inner struggle in being self-kind?
Well, it's really been perfectionism. It's been very high standards, which it does come from my upbringing, and a lot of those high standards have served me really well. But they serve me well until they don't, because sometimes I push myself way too hard, or I judge myself way too harshly about things that just either don't matter or do get in the way of me being more satisfied and being, feeling better about myself. And, again, it just goes back to self-awareness. Like when you're noticing that, bring it to the surface and get curious about, like, well, where did this come from? Is this something that I consciously decided? Was this something that was handed down to me? Is this like a family pattern? Is this something coming from the way that my parents raised me? Where did it come from? And is this something I want to keep going forward? Right. But in the meantime, like, just be kind and be like, yeah, that's, I always say that, your greatest weakness is your greatest strength overused. So if you are very detail oriented, great, that serves you very well. But if you take it too far, it becomes perfectionism, and maybe you become, paralyzed because you're too fearful, because nothing's ever perfect, right? But yeah, I know, like you and I, you and I share
Been
so
there,
many
done that, still
things.
do it, but try to fight it as much as I can. And
Yeah.
as you're talking about those tools, I mentioned earlier CTCR, and if you don't mind, I'll share that with the audience. I use something called CTCR from last 13 or so years, maybe more. What it is C is clarity. The clarity I talk about is, where do I stand right now? What position am I in? What's my role in what is happening? What's making me unhappy? How am I enabling it? And how are others, what roles are others playing? Once I have that clarity, then is the T, which is truth. Accept the truth. Okay, this is what's positive. This is what's negative. This is what I'm afraid of. This is what I'm ashamed of. Because what I've realized is, once you accept your truth, nobody can scare you.
No.
You
It's
already
true.
know your truth. And now if somebody comes and says, by the way, this is what's wrong with you. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it.
Whatever.
I'm working
Yep.
on it.
Yeah. They
So
can't shame
it
you.
just
Right.
it just takes so much burden off your shoulders, because
Mhm.
suddenly you're already prepared to handle that attack. And once you have the clarity and truth, for me, it is about courage. Um, Having the courage to, okay, so now, while I know where do I stand, to have the courage to move forward, to take the first step. You don't need to take a leap all of a sudden. You don't need to take big steps. Take one small step at a time to change things, to get what I call reclaim, your boundaries,
Yeah,
your
totally.
control,
Yes.
your peace. Your peace of
Mhm.
mind is so
Mhm.
important. And once you start that reclaim, the only thing you need is, because you have already started taking action. For me, the R is resilience. Resilience to not repeat the pattern. Resilience to say no. I've been there. I've
Mhm.
done that. I know what happens. I know how I play a role in this.
Mhm.
I know what is the possibility, and I know how it's
Yeah.
damaging. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm not going to let that happen again. And
Mhm.
I guess the same thing, to not feel guilty, to give ourselves grace, to just be kind to ourselves, to say, you know what? You need to do this for yourself. So
Yeah.
stick to your guns and don't let it happen
Yeah.
again. Right?
Yes.
I do have to ask you, how do often people, either intentionally or unintentionally, conflate self kindness with self indulgence. So how do we
Oh, yeah.
untangle that conflation of self-kindness with self-indulgence, or people
Hmm.
call you
Hmm.
selfish, while all we're
Yeah.
trying to do is give ourselves some grace?
Yeah. Well, and even like the self-care that you brought up earlier, as you brought up that earlier, I was thinking, to me, self-care, it almost these days sounds like a marketing slogan. It's like it's a way to sell spa services and,
It is.
mani-pedis and stuff like that. Um, but I think it really goes to that self-awareness, right? Like, are we using, like, oh, I'm going to take myself out to a nice dinner or I'm going to go shopping? Is that a distraction from what's really going on within
Yep.
you? Are you using that to distract yourself? Or are you in tune with what you really need? And you're like, I'm hungry and I'm in the mood for this particular type of food. And I love myself and I'm going to go and give that to myself. That I think it's really the presence and the, being mindful about, okay, where is this coming from? Is this a distraction or is this a true need and desire that I'm going to be present for and enjoy?
I love that. So, for me, that is like, I will remember that as, am I distracting myself or am I fulfilling myself? You know,
Yes, yeah, exactly,
is
exactly.
it is it
Love
is it
that.
making me whole again, or is it just
Mhm.
delaying the
Is it
inevitable, the exhaustion, the
surface?
burnout,
Yes.
and all that? So,
Yeah.
what is really happening? And I think if we start asking
Mhm.
that question, that can make life so much easier.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that happens in all this process, again, I talk about the fear and the shame, is self criticism, gaslighting yourself.
Yeah.
A term, self gaslighting, I learned from Joe. I knew the term gaslighting, but I learned
Uh-huh.
from
Yeah.
Joanna. So
Yeah.
we gaslight ourselves. Nobody needs to do that. And, I've been recently reading things where I said
Mhm.
98% of our problems are right here, and
Yeah.
there's only 2% that are real. So, how do we navigate the journey from self criticism to self compassion and self empowerment?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it really goes back to realizing that when we tell ourselves certain things, we may be trying to protect ourselves from, things that have hurt us in the past. Right? So we've developed certain coping mechanisms because we've experienced things in the past that didn't feel good. And it might be back when you were a child that, if you did a certain thing, that would lead to a punishment because your parents didn't like seeing you do that. And so you start to maybe subconsciously look for similar triggers out in the world. And when we see those, we've internalized the messages that we got from our parents or other authority figures. And when we see those triggers, we start that dialogue in our head like, oh, you better not do that. People are going to think negatively, or you're going to get hurt, or this is dangerous, or whatever. And it may or may not be. I mean, to your point, like there's only a 2% chance that this is a real problem, but there's well, I call it the gremlin, right? And this is what I learned in my coach training, that it's this little voice in your head that is trying to keep you safe, but it will tell you horrendous things
Oh,
in
yeah.
its effort to keep you safe. It does not care about anything. It doesn't care about your self-esteem. It doesn't care about, how you feel about yourself, anything. All it cares about is keeping you safe. And, might want to keep you like locked in a cage. And we really need to use, our more rational part of our thinking and realize like what that is. That's not us. That is just a part of us that is trying to keep us safe. And we've got to bring that more rational part in to say, what's the likelihood that that's going to happen? Or where is this coming from? And then make a conscious decision to step outside the comfort zone and test it. Right. And then very
Absolutely.
often what we do is realize like, that's an old tape that is just
Yeah.
playing from, my grandmother, or something. My grandmother used to tell me the weirdest things like, don't chew newspaper. And I'd be like, what? like, yeah, those inks are toxic. And I'd be like, why would I ever chew newspaper? But people tell you weird things, and especially when you're young and you're like so impressionable, right? You
Yeah.
start thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't touch newspaper, or whatever. Sorry, I went down like a really weird
No, no,
digress.
absolutely. Look,
She used to.
it's
She also used to tell me to like make sure that you eat your food. Like if you had like meat, potatoes, and vegetables, like that you had to take a bite of each because that's how it got mixed up in your stomach. And I'm like, all
But you
right.
know what? You're right. We are impressionable, and some of those things stay with us for such a long time, and we never
Yeah.
question why.
Right.
We don't question
Right.
why.
Exactly.
We just take it and we pass it on to generation after
You
generation
don't
after generation.
remember where it even came from. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a whole theory, I can't remember, where scientists took lots of monkeys together, and they harmed one monkey, and then other one was like they copy each other's reaction. By the time they reached to the 10th monkey, he didn't know why everybody was scared. He just reacted to something because he saw the pattern.
Yeah, it was like
So
an
he didn't
emotional
know the
game of
source of the
telephone.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that does happen. I mean, there is intergenerational trauma, that comes from, people that have gone through horrendous things, and then they're so fearful and they're very, safety conscious, like to the point of neurosis, and they pass that on to their children, and then their children may pass it on to their children. And then, 3 generations later, they don't know why they're like that. Oh, it's because, granddad had something, he was in the war or something like that,
Yeah.
Um,
Or because that's how they did it in my family. That's how it was. It has been
yes,
since generations. That
right.
actually is the answer. We've been doing
Yeah,
this for
yeah,
generations, but why?
right,
We never
right,
asked why. We never stopped to
right.
say. And the thing is, not only why, we don't even ask, is it still relevant? In my time,
Exactly. And we do
in my
need to,
generation, is it needed? Is it
we need
even
to ask
applicable?
that.
Right?
We
And
definitely need to ask that. Yes.
I guess the main thing that I take from you in all of this is to always try and go back to the root of where is this coming from? The fear, the
Mm-hmm.
shame, the self-criticism, where is it coming
Mm-hmm.
from? And I always kind of fall back on, what is my role in it? How did I enable
Yeah.
it? As a child, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe where I was generally a victim in
Mm-hmm.
situation, maybe I didn't choose it, but how did I, after getting over that situation, how did I continue to
Yeah.
allow that? How did I continue to
Yeah.
make it or keep it as a pattern that I always get triggered from, which is still affecting me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. You know what I would add to that, Sebastian, is that at the heart of this, you're okay. You are absolutely fine the way you are, right? So if you said this earlier, like when you're standing in your truth, people can't really hurt you unless you allow them to. And the truth is that everybody listening to this, you are okay the way you are. Okay. So don't feel like you've got to fall into like, oh, let me do this for other people so they'll like me more and they'll think I'm okay. Guess what? You're already okay. So just sit in that. Love yourself. Know that you don't need to do anything. You just need to be. Like you're here for it doesn't mean that we can't grow, we can't learn, but you're at your core beautiful and okay as you are. Like
Absolutely.
that is a place of strength. That's a place of
Absolutely. And I think
love.
we are losing the art of taking a pause. We're losing the art of just being, just living in the
Sure.
moment. Either we are sad about the past, or we are so worried about the future that we are losing this very moment, which
Mhm.
I've done. I've done a lot. What I
Of
find
course.
is, when I allow myself to just breathe, just be, just,
Mhm.
I can still operate and do things that I'm doing, but allow myself
Mhm.
to not worry about what happened or what is going to
Mhm.
happen. Life gets so much easier. Suddenly you can breathe so
Mhm.
much better. You
Sure.
can,
Sure.
you don't feel upset with yourself before anybody else. You don't feel
Mhm.
upset with yourself. So I
Yeah.
do have to ask, how do we collectively, of course, I have to take responsibility for being kind to myself, but how do we collectively, as community, as people, as workplaces, as leaders, normalize self-kindness?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with being present ourselves, and also to encourage it with other people, right? Like if um, try to make people aware of some of the things that they're doing that might not be necessary. And I actually think back to whenever I was a manager and sitting down with one of my direct reports who came in and she was all stressed out and everything. And I said, well, what's going on? Why are you so stressed out? Oh, I had to take my computer home over the weekend. I worked all over the weekend on this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, why did you do that? Like
Yeah.
if you're having trouble with prioritizing everything that you have going on, come to me. I will help you. I do not want you to feel like you've got to sacrifice yourself. Now granted, I'm not going to say that of course there are deadlines and so forth, but she wasn't raising her hand to ask for help to say, you know what, I don't want to have to work 16 hours over the weekends. Like, can you help me figure out like how I might do this without sacrificing myself? And I think so often, and in that case, I mean, she had just made this decision that this was necessary, that she had to do this without even asking or even thinking like maybe there's a different way to go about reaching this goal. And I think that we all need to stop and I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I mean, I do think it starts with us, but if we do it ourselves and then we can also sort of model and encourage other people to value themselves also, and to realize that, listen, if we each show up as full and as whole as we can, it's actually going to make the world a better place, right? Because what happens when we're living in fear is that we're spending so much energy trying to protect ourselves and hiding and so forth, that we're not showing up as our full selves and being able to, collaborate and be creative and get into this like growth mindset. We're more like, duck and cover and hide and protect,
Just trying
which
to survive and nothing more.
yes, and there's not a whole lot that happens, when you're hiding in a cave, in a fetal position trying to survive. Sometimes that's necessary, sometimes it's necessary,
Absolutely.
but we're doing it way too often when it's not necessary, just because we're feeling like fearful about like, oh, I see a potential, trigger over there, so I better run and hide. No, like let's start to take some little baby steps outside of that comfort zone and test these fears a little bit, test putting boundaries in place, test giving yourself positive messages when you're saying like, oh, people are going to think I'm selfish. Instead say like, hey, I deserve to love myself. I deserve care, whether it's coming from somebody else or, coming from me. I can give myself the care that I'm yearning for from other people.
And I talk about, I shared this with you, in our personal conversations, that
Hmm.
I have mirrors all over my place because I talk to the mirror. I
Hmm.
give myself
Yeah.
the strength by talking to the mirror and saying, hey, it's
Yes.
okay, you're a good person,
Yeah.
everything is
Yeah.
all good. But I think one thing that I take away from what you just said, Shade, is asking for help is also an act of self-kindness. There's
Yes, it is.
nothing wrong with saying, hey, I don't know how
Hmm.
to do this, or I'm struggling with this, I need
Sure.
help, support me,
Yeah.
guide me, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, what I will say to that is that that's actually hard for me to do. And if I step back, I realize the reason why is that when I was a kid, that wasn't encouraged. That I would sometimes get either not get help or get a negative reaction to my ask for help from my parents. And it made me a very self-sufficient person, but it also made me sort of like an isolated person. Like I didn't want to let my guard down and let
Yeah.
people know that I had needs. But when we do, that's where intimacy and friendship and, you know, uh, I mean, self-care can also be letting other people in so that they can care for you too, but care for you in a real way, not in a like quid pro quo transactional, you have to do this for me or else I'm not going to care about you. Like, cuz
Absolutely.
I mean, you and I have this kind of relationship, right? That we care for each other and we're letting each other see each other, and it's not, we're not really getting anything out of it except for just, friendship and love.
Absolutely. And I think that's what it is. It is about supporting each other genuinely, and it's about having that safe space with somebody where you can share, knowing you're not going to have to pay back in some form,
Yeah.
some shape or
Yeah,
form. There's
exactly.
nothing expected
Exactly.
of you. You're just getting support, and that's it. And I think that's what being a human is. You help each other
Mhm.
when there's the right time. So I do have to ask. I'm going to go back a little bit to the conversations you and I have. Uh, One of the struggle is to kind of express our struggle or pain or vulnerability to others because we don't want to be seen weak. We don't want to be seen as, oh, you're not
Mhm.
capable. Um, and of course, that goes back to the trauma, the triggers, and all that.
Mhm.
But how do we convince ourselves that we don't have to go and tell everybody, but how can we still be there for each other, or
Mhm.
reach out to people and say, you know, I I think I'm struggling, help.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, it's interesting because I think there's like sort of this like continuum, and certainly we've all run into people that are like super needy, right? And sometimes we might even be like, I don't even want to get involved there because I don't have enough time, or it's going to be too draining, or whatever. And then there's others who, they're just like, locked up like a vault. And you may even sense that they have needs, but they're not going to open it up enough to even allow you to help them. I think that you've got to, you know, notice you've got to take some small risks to begin with to see, I've actually been disappointed in my life that, some people that I felt were, good friends and that I had helped a lot did not reciprocate.
Yeah,
Like when I was in need, they did not step up, even though I had really served them, tremendously. But like I just sort of
absolutely.
take note of that and start to realize, like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to choose not to give as much in that situation because it's not reciprocal. But then, it, you get to know people and you take it in baby steps and start to realize like who are the people that I can trust. But it takes some risks, but I would say like, don't throw open the floodgates with somebody that you just met,
Yeah,
like,
I
um,
think it's
it,
the same thing you were talking about earlier. Sometimes we have to put the boundaries back up when we feel like they're
mhm,
not being respected,
yeah,
and at the same time, a little risk, a little sort of going out of your comfort zone is required to find out who your people are. And I'm going to take
yes,
a couple of
exactly.
comments if you don't mind. Uh,
Sure.
Dahlia says, allowing someone to give you care is as much a gift as when you care for others, but it is so easy to forget. Dahlia,
Mhm.
so agree. Uh, I think it's so natural to forget. Uh, and yeah, we're always helping others, but when it comes
Mhm.
to us, we just forget that hey, people can help us too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with that, that it can feel so good to share, either your knowledge or your resources or your abilities. Like, why are we doing this? Right? Like, why are we doing this? Like, a lot of times helping other people actually gives somebody purpose. But obviously, part of what we've been talking about here is finding that appropriate boundary, right? Like not doing it to the point where you're completely used up and exhausted, but meeting somebody where they are, giving what you're able to give, recognizing that it's not your job to save somebody else, but if you can help them and you want to, and then do it, or if you
Absolutely.
need help, raise your hand and ask for help, but also realize that it's not anybody else's job to save you. But
It's a
be clear
responsibility
on
that you
what you
have
need.
towards yourself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It's balance, I suppose.
Yeah. And Joanna says, having that friendship and love is worth its weight in gold. As you both said, there are no real expectations beyond being there of each other. And
Hmm.
you know what? Joe, in you, in Terry, I have not just gold, I have platinum. So I have that. And I hope you guys feel a little bit of that. But it is important. It is important to have that friendship, to have that kind of people. I think one thing I'll say is we try and make that available to everybody. It's not possible. Close relationships, friendships, support, and trust, it's not
Hmm.
something that happens with everybody. As you said, you can't just open the floodgates with everybody and
Hmm.
very
Sure.
soon. You have to balance. You have to find out
Yeah.
who's the right person and when it's the right time.
That's right. That's right. And, I think you can have different types of friendships too, right? And just recognize what, what's appropriate with certain relationships, right? And don't try to, automatically make somebody that you feel close to into the person that you need if they're not showing any, desire or ability to do that, right? Like you can't fast forward. And really, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about narcissists and so forth, like in other conversations. And you hear a lot about narcissists coming in and love bombing, right? Where they'll
Oh
come
yeah.
in and be like, oh, you're my, you've just met them, but they're saying like, oh, you're everything I ever dreamed of, blah 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 blah. And I mean, it's a strategy to get people to drop their boundaries, right? So that they can rush in and possess you to the point that people are feeling like, I have no choice but to just do what this person has asked. And then there's also that fear that, you've gotten all of this quote unquote love. It's not really love, it's manipulation. But, it feels good when somebody's focused on you and is telling you you're the
Yeah.
best and they love you and you're beautiful and blah, 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 blah. But not having that boundary and not learning like, okay, what's really going on here can paint you into a corner where it's not going to end pretty, right? Or it's going to something very dramatic is going to have to happen to reclaim your boundaries. Yeah,
Being there, I could have a 25 hours show if you want just on
I
that.
know. You and I both
I,
could. I mean, we both have had a lot of bad experiences with
we
that.
could literally just sit here the whole weekend and still not be done with it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and Joe says, I found that if I'm looking for a savior, chances are I'm playing a psychological game from a victim stance.
Sure.
And Joe, I have
That
to say
makes
this:
sense.
looking for a savior and trying to be a savior is never, it just never works out. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to be a savior in every situation, especially for the wrong person, you end up
Mhm.
exhausted. You don't necessarily help them. You maybe make them kind of like a codependent relationship. And same way, if
Yeah,
you're looking for
exactly.
a savior, you're not trying to get to the root of the problem, which you've been talking about. You're just trying to distract yourself for the time being to kind of get somebody else to share the burden of your accountability towards yourself, right?
Yeah,
And
there's a
and
lack of balance.
and when that ends, when it doesn't work out, then you're left more damaged and more sort of destroyed.
Mhm.
So I do have to ask, we're running out of time. I would like us and I would like the audience to kind of try and make a commitment. What is one commitment, Terry, you are ready to make today to be genuinely kind to yourself moving forward? Anything that you think that you really need to do?
Well, I think I need to take the advice that I gave earlier, which is in those moments where I'm feeling compelled to do something, whether it's like shopping or to really stop and say, where's this coming from? What is my true need in this moment? Because maybe it is to go for a walk, maybe it's to take a nap, maybe it's to sit down and meditate. It might not be for that, big hit of dopamine because I know I've got a package coming from Amazon or whatever.
Yep. Get your dopamine from trees and
Right.
nature and
Yes.
birds.
Yes. Yes.
Get it
Being
get
with
it from
myself.
get it from things in all the nature that which is not asking anything of you, which is not,
Yes,
it's not
it's just being
transactional, it's not
present.
temporary, it's always there.
It's just being present. Yeah.
Which means I need to make a commitment. So I think the commitment that I'll make myself with myself is stop thinking and catastrophizing the worst scenario in my head without having a conversation. And I'm saying this because in recent time, and if we've had this conversation where I just did not reach out to the person that I needed to speak to, tell them what's going on, tell them what the struggle is, and it did not help. So what I need to do, or the commitment that I'm making today, is when I feel that I need to take action and I need to express myself and let somebody else know, hey, this is my struggle, and maybe I kind of need your help to because we're doing this together, we're in a relationship together, I need your help to figure this out. So to speak up, to share, rather than assume the worst case scenario in my mind and think like, oh my God, everything is it's gonna break loose, right?
Yeah.
But before we finish, I do have to ask, you have written a book called Winning the Game of Work. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm saying the name of the book wrong. Tell us a little bit about the book. Why did you write it, and what's the book all about?
Okay, Winning the Game of Work is all of the unwritten rules of how to be happy and successful at work that nobody ever told me. I feel like I learned a lot of things the hard way by, kind of falling my face, making silly mistakes at work that were getting in the way of my goal of quote unquote being successful. And I also, learned some from mentors. But what I realize is that, this kind of happened for me, and I see it a lot with clients, is that they think that when they get to a certain level that they're going to be happy at work, right? So they really don't pay attention to their needs. They're not being self-kind. They're taking their computer home and working 20 hours on the weekend and that kind of thing, all in the name of like being successful. But I think that you can be successful, but like, what is success unless you're feeling satisfied and happy? And I truly believe that you can expand the overlap between your professional success and your personal happiness, but you need to do some things differently. And the book is all about that, how-tos and also stories of how other people have done it. And what we talked about here today is certainly part of what can empower people to do that, paying attention to themselves, knowing themselves, caring for themselves, and not, allowing themselves to get into burnout.
Thank you so much. And I'm assuming the book is available on Amazon and everywhere else where people can find books usually. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a wholesome conversation, and with you it always is. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you too, Sebastian.
Absolutely. Now, don't go anywhere. I'll just close up and I'll be back with you in a second.
Okay.
So that was Terry McDougall. And I think the three things that I took away, and I was making notes, is number one, if you are afraid, if there is a fear or shame or embarrassment, which all I think is part of fear for me, find the root of that fear. Where is it coming from? What is happening, or what's the origin of that fear? And then work on that. Another thing that we spoke about, and Terry put very eloquently, to sort of bring your boundaries back up. When you realize that your boundaries are weakening, you're not taking care of yourself, bring those boundaries back up. And the third thing that I kind of, from the whole conversation, is took away is, at the end of the day, it is not your responsibility to be there for everybody at every time, in every case. You have to just be and take care of yourself. Live in this moment and genuinely be kind to yourself. That's how the kindness really begins. So that's it for now. Until then, I'm Sebastian One, the Almost Naked CEO and your intention strategist. I'm here because I care and because I give a damn. So take care. Dream big. and make it happen intentionally. See you later.